just have to create a print statement. Perfect. And if you're creating a really enthusiastic tip calculator, you can replace the full stop with an exclamation mark. Okay, so let's run it step by step to make sure that we don't have any errors along the way. So the first step seems to be working. Now the next step is to ask the user for some inputs, and we want to know what was their total bill. What did it come to? So let's go ahead and create an input and ask them what was the total bill, and then we'll add a dollar sign or whatever currency it is that you prefer to work with, because when we actually run this, you'll see that the input will go straight after the end of that string, so at the dollar sign. So now we can enter a dollar amount like this, but it's not really saved anywhere. This data just disappears because we haven't stored it inside a variable. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's call this variable bill, and we'll set it to equal whatever the user typed into this input. Now remember that this bill is going to have a data type of a string, right? So if I go ahead and hit run, and let's just type some numbers in here, you'll see that the data type of the bill is, as we said, a string. In order to be able to do maths, you might remember we have to change this into a number format, so a float or an int. Now in this case, because the bill is likely to have numbers after the decimal place, it's probably better that we turn it into a float so that we get the most accurate result possible. Now that we're done with the bill, the next question the tip calculator should ask is, what percentage tip would you like to give? 10, 12, or 15? Or you can of course switch this up depending on how much tip you normally give. So the next line is going to be another input. Here I'm asking the user how much tip would you like to give and giving them some examples. And notice how in my examples I don't actually have the percentage sign here because I don't really want them to type the percent sign into this input, because if they do, when they say 12%, this is going to be really hard for me to turn the 12% into an actual number. So you could, in your input message, say something like, how much tip would you like to give? 10, 12, or 15. Please don't add any percentage signs, just add the number, or something like that. But again, once we've done this, it's not stored anywhere unless we add it into a variable. Now we've got a bill that stores the total bill as a float, and we've got a tip, which is going to be a whole number, 10, 12, or 15, right? So depending on what you think is best, you can either turn this into a float, or in my case, I'm probably going to convert it into an integer. So now we're on to the final step, which is how many people to split the bill between. So let's go ahead and create a variable called people, and I'm going to add an int wrapper around this input so that even in the very beginning we know that we have to convert the number of people into a whole number, because I've never had a meal with 3.5 people before. So the input is going to be how many people to split the bill, and at this point they should enter the number of people, which will turn into an integer stored inside this variable called people. So now that we've got all the data collected from the user, we're finally ready to do some maths. And we said that the way to work out the tip is by multiplying it by 1 point, and then the number after the decimal point is whatever percentage they decided to give. So it would be 1.1 if it was 10% and 1.15 if it was 15%. Let's go ahead and calculate the bill with tip. So remember how we said that before, the tip percentage is equal to the whole number, 10, 12, or 15, divided by 100, which turns it into 0.1, 0.12, or 0.15. And then, once this calculation is done, we can multiply it by the bill. And then finally, we add that to the original bill. So let's go ahead and print this and just check to see that it looks sensible. So bill with tip is what we're going to print, and let's put some easy numbers in there. let's say that the bill was $100 and the tip was 10%. So then the 10% of $100 is $10. So the bill with tip, that's what's going to be printed next, should be 110. So we can type anything in here because we're not using it. And you can see that this calculation, bill with tip, is 110, which is what we want. Now, there's a lot of other ways that you can express this. For example, you could say bill times 1 plus tip divided by 100. So this would actually give you the same result as well. But remember what we said previously about how Python is a little bit weird with floating point numbers. But essentially, this is still giving us the same result, which is 110. So you can choose whichever way you find most intuitive. And if you want, you can even split this up into several steps, right? We could say that tip as percent is equal to tip divided by 100. And then we can multiply the bill by the tip as a percent to get the total tip amount. And then finally, we can get the total bill by adding the bill to the total tip amount. Feel free to do this whichever way makes sense to you, but I'm going to leave it with as many steps as possible so that you can actually work through the logic if you got stuck on this maths. Now, the next thing we need to do is to divide the total bill by the number of people. So if we had 5 people, then we would divide it 5 ways, right? So let's call this bill per person, which is going to be equal to the total bill divided by the number of people. Now, at this stage, this bill per person is a floating point number, so it could have many, many digits after the decimal point. If we want to round this to 2 decimal places, then you might remember from some of the lessons today, we have access to a function called round. And here we can add the number that we want to round, which is the bill per person. And then after a comma, we can specify how precise, how many numbers or how many decimal places do we want to round this bill to. And in our case, it's 2 decimal places. So now this is the final amount, which I'll call final amount, which is the bill per person rounded to 2 decimal places. And we can now finally print this to the user and say each person should pay. And remember, you can either use string concatenation, which will require you to convert this number into a string again, or use the trick that we learned in the previous lessons where we can create an F string by adding F in front of the string and then using some curly braces to insert the final amount right here. And we can write the final amount dollars, or we can put a dollar sign in front and maybe a colon here. And now if we clear our console and run our code, then you'll see it work. So welcome to the tip calculator. What was the total bill? Let's make up some random number. What percentage tip? Let's say we're going to give 15. And then we're splitting it between 5 people. And it calculates everything, doing all of that maths. And finally, it rounds it to 2 decimal places, giving us the final amount each person should pay.